Welcome all of you here today. Thanks for coming. We've been traveling a little bit this week with rolling out the QER and then CERA Week, but did want to have a chance to bring some of the stakeholders together here because, as you know very well, the stakeholder process has been absolutely central to what we've done, and I'm sure a lot of people here in this room have been contributing, certainly comments, suggestions, which we appreciate. I'm not going to say too much overview because I think again this group is extremely knowledgeable. Just a few points. Again, obviously, as you all know, the focus of this first installment was on energy infrastructure, and as the document says, there were lots of reasons for that focus. And we could go through all of the revolution in the energy system, oil and gas, renewables, demand side, all kinds of things, new stresses on the system, some from that very revolution itself, of course, others from things like meeting our climate mitigation goals in the long term, certainly addressing the climate related and other cyber, physical risks, et cetera. The risks associated with those factors, but also I think it's really important that we also emphasize as well the opportunities that come from right now meeting these challenges of infrastructure. The process. Again, I already mentioned the stakeholder part, including all of our regional meetings across the country, also in Canada, were very important. That was a very pleasant part of the process. We also had about 20 agencies involved, and that was a challenging part of the process, as you all know. But it was, from the initial construct, viewed as absolutely essential to have that kind of cross-government approach, because, again, as you know, energy equities are so spread out across the government that we really needed that process to go forward. I'm going to just say a few words because I'm going to leave this in the hands of Melanie and her team. But to approach this, as you know, the oversight function, if you like, was in the Executive Office of the President through OSTP and through the Domestic Policy Council. And DOE was charged in the President's directive to essentially function as the Executive Secretariat, really meaning to be the focal point for bringing together the kinds of data-driven and analytically driven product that we were looking for, and I hope you concur that this document does have that flavor. I do caution that we still have 3 major appendices to get out. We hope to do that promptly, and they will add substantially to the database, if you like, that the analysis is built upon. So that'll be coming out hopefully in a few weeks, and maybe in that time frame we will have also sharpened up the focus area for the next installment. Now, to exercise that function, to carry it out, we formed when I started here in this position, really a new office. Energy policy and systems analysis. And I really want to emphasize those last 2 words, systems analysis, because that was very much a reflection of the anticipated core role for that office in fact, being the focal point for getting this QER done. In fact, and Melanie Kenderdine very ably both pulled the office together and led it through this process, very ably supported by a crew that I would like her to actually introduce now.
Okay. Karen Whalen, and Karen is the Deputy Director of EPSA.
Why don't you use the microphone?
Karen Wayland is the Deputy Director in EPSA for state, local, and tribal. She has managed all of the stakeholder meetings, outreach, and some people in her office have assisted with the interagency effort as well. Hugh Chin is Deputy Director of Finance and Budget. Judy Greenwald, she does efficiency, climate change, and environment. I'm trying to remember. And Carmine DeFiglio is the Deputy Director and does energy security, focused largely on oil and gas at this point in time. And
He was here in my first time around the track.
Mine too. This is the second time I've managed Carmine. Although he's not, he's unmanageable. We love Carmine. I think Jonathan Pershing is traveling this morning. He's our principal deputy, and Bill Hederman, I think he's still in Houston. He's still in Houston. Mm-hmm. So a couple other deputies. So,
and also I might say the unnamed youth here in the front row who were really the secret sauce in much of the analysis, and I just want to have them introduced because I think they have worked really hard, I have to say, and we owe them a lot. And they have a few days to rest before round two we get into. But anyway, again, that's really what I wanted to say to kind of kick this off, and going to leave you in the hands of the very capable hands of Melanie and her team, and I hope you have a lively exchange, and we will continue to look for feedback and suggestions. Just to say that I think the last thing I will say is that we've been encouraged by the response from many quarters, and I would single out in particular the leadership of the congressional energy committees on both sides of both chambers, the chairs, Congressman Upton and Senator Murkowski, the ranking members, Mr. Pallone and Maria Cantwell. And on Tuesday, in fact, Tuesday morning, we will have a hearing in the Senate. There's been a lot of interactions with staffs, again, in both chambers. So we are hopeful that one of the original objectives to provide, again, a data-driven, analytically grounded product that could serve as the basis of administration, congressional dialogue, and of bipartisan discussion as a basis for legislative action. We're hoping. I mean, I would say initial signs are very positive, and over these next couple of months, we certainly hope to make some headway. So again, thank you all again for your participation, and we want to keep that dialogue going over the next year and a half. Thank you. Okay, Melanie.
Thank you all for coming, and sorry, Karen and I were in Bulgaria. We did not get back until late Saturday night. The Bulgarians wanted us to teach them how to do a QER. One of the messages is don't be late, because this QER was supposed to have been rolled out by the time we went to Bulgaria, and so we were there Saturday night. I think we found out for certain on Friday, while we were in Bulgaria, that the vice president was going to be rolling out the QER in Philadelphia on Tuesday. So we had a lovely Sunday and Monday after we got back from Bulgaria, and then day before yesterday, the Secretary and I got on a plane and flew to CERAWeek in Houston. And so it's been a wild week. We are very excited that the Vice President rolled out this document, and I think that there are reasons for that. The Vice President himself has been a stalwart champion for infrastructure, not just energy infrastructure, but he has been going around the country promoting funding for a range of types of infrastructure. And so he was the perfect person to roll this out. It has been a focus of his for a long time. Say a few more words about the process. The Secretary mentioned that he set up the Energy Policy and Systems Analysis Office. The Secretary also did not mention that he was, when he was Professor Moniz, on PCAST, and President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, and that PCAST recommended that we do a quadrennial energy review. In their recommendation, it was a little kind of fuzzed up with what we are doing here at the department, the quadrennial technology review. The QTR will be out, I think, in early summer, but that is an internal DOE document. The QER is the product of a huge interagency and stakeholder process, and in addition to the analytical work that we have done in EPSA, and there is a task force in the White House. I'm going to pick up the microphone because I'm too short for this podium. I can't see you. There are 22 agencies that work with that task force. It is that has been interesting. We completed the analysis within DOE in late January, sent it over to the White House. The document then went into interagency review. I have to say that our sister agencies made, I think, very significant improvements. They know what they do a lot better than we do, and we took most of their comments. And so, but as you might imagine, adjudicating and litigating about 1,500 comments took a fair amount of time. And so, the interagency review took a little longer than we thought it would, and getting the final document together was a blur. We will have final documents printed up at some point in the very near future. It's on our website at what, Karen? I can never remember. Energy.gov/QER. Right, so you can get it there, and we will have hard copies printed. We were in such a rush to get the copies printed that we to get the document finalized, that I said print only 20 copies, because I knew we would find an enormous number of just figure errors, et cetera, and we've cleaned those up yesterday. I think the final document will be printed shortly, and so if you're interested, we can get you a hard copy at some point in the future. The Secretary also mentioned that we have 3 large appendices coming out, and I'll explain to you what they are and how we have structured the analysis for this document. And it's long, okay? I don't know everything in it, although I've read everything in it many times, but I might call on the deputies at some point when I don't know what I'm talking about. This is, we've developed our own vocabulary in EPSA for the QER. This is what we call our flower diagram, and what it shows, it really is an outline, kind of a 3-dimensional outline of the QER itself, all focused on developing an energy infrastructure for the 21st century. And it's hard to read, but the top middle petal is enhancing infrastructure resilience, reliability, safety, and asset security. That's as opposed to energy security, which we'll talk about in a minute. That is cross-cutting. It is an integrated look at all of the TS&D infrastructures, and that is TS&D writ large. Pipes, liquid and gas pipes, wires. We ended up doing a lot of work on rail, barge, ports, etc. as well, export facilities, and not something that I had anticipated having to know a lot about when I was at the department in the Clinton administration. But we spent a lot of time looking at some new issues, and so that is integrated across those infrastructures. Down at the bottom, that is modernizing U.S. energy security infrastructures, and that is both geopolitical infrastructures. We've spent a fair amount of time working with the G7 to develop a broader definition of energy security for IEA countries and G7 or European Union countries and the G7. But it is also about about largely the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and I'll say more about that in a minute. On the left here, improving shared transport infrastructures. I mentioned this is rail transport, rail, barge, and roads fundamentally. And then the only concession we made to looking at an actual physical infrastructure was modernizing the grid. And we did that because the others are all integrated across the different infrastructures. That one is not. Because everything else depends on the grid, and so we made a concession there to physical infrastructure and have a chapter on that. We have other chapters on siting, jobs. These are cross-cutting issues. Siting, jobs, environment, very cross-cutting, and I'm forgetting one. I can't remember what it is. So anyway, these are the integrated analyses. The appendices are deep dives on physical infrastructures, and there'll be natural gas, electricity, and liquid fuels, but those are not analytical. They're just much more informational. They don't include recommendations. They are analytical, but they are not. They don't have findings or recommendations. It is largely information, and those will be coming out shortly. They're long documents. That's another thing that getting through interagency review is taking time. So anyway, you all know that we have a very dramatically changed energy space, certainly in the last 6 or 7 years, and very different than when I was here in the Clinton administration. We are now the #1 producer of oil and gas combined in the world. I think EIA says in a very short period of time, the U.S. is going to be a net exporter of energy. Not oil, obviously. We're still going to be consuming a lot of oil, but a net exporter of energy in general, and that would be coal and gas. Our solar and wind generation has increased dramatically. Efficiency of vehicles has gone up dramatically. Efficiency in general, the efficiency standards that we've been putting out this time around, and when I was here before, have had a major impact on energy consumption and electricity consumption, which is fundamentally flat. Oil consumption is flat. Those consumption profiles and demand profiles do have some profound policy effects. So we have a very dramatically changed energy space, and We started with TS&D infrastructure because it tends to set patterns of energy production and consumption for decades, and if we want to transform our energy market space, we need to do some serious analysis of those infrastructures that are going to, in part, dictate how we go. And so that's why we started with TS&D infrastructure. This is the top petal on the flower diagram, increasing the resilience, reliability, safety, and asset security of TS&D infrastructure. We did a lot of analysis of not of climate mitigation, because TS&D infrastructure is not a major contributor to climate change. It's the emissions are coming from generation, et cetera, and end use, not from TS&D infrastructure. But the climate has an enormous impact on TS&D infrastructure and climate change. And so this is the pestilence slide over here on the upper left, and I think the green, you can't read the legend, but the green dots are earthquakes, red are wildfires. The purple are hurricanes, and the width of the strand on those hurricanes is the strength of the hurricane, and then the gold here are tornadoes. And so we are seeing increasing frequency of those and increasing frequency of billion-dollar weather-related events, and costing us a lot of money, and a concern and issue for infrastructure. This is sea level rise and storm surge, different scenarios, and I'm going to skip over this because it's hard to read. I think you have a copy of this in the summary for policymakers that you all were given. This was a tough figure to make, but I think it's highly impactful in the end, and I think we worked and got it right. Look it over, and we can you can talk to James Bradbury about it. It took him a while to get it right. These are, as I mentioned, the billion-dollar disaster event types by year, and you can see very significant increases in 2011, 2012, coming back down a little in 2013 and 14. But the yellow bar, which is the biggest, is severe storms. And severe storms and increased precipitation, whether there's drought or not, your increased precipitation events are more severe, and so that's problematic. And this is increased precipitation down here, and it's the heaviest 1% of all daily events. That's what I mean, it's severity, between 58 and 2012, and you can see up there the Northeast 71% increase of those types of events. So we are seeing major changes in the climate, and it is impacting our infrastructure. Let me go back there and say also something else we've been looking at: cyber incidents. DHS shows a 53%, I think it's 2013 numbers, 53% of all cyber attacks were on energy installations in the United States. The next highest critical infrastructure was in low double digits, and all the rest were in single digits. So the energy installations are a target of cyber attacks. For electricity, for example, we've lost very few hours of service because of them, but they are substantial, and they are increasing. High voltage transformers are critical. We have done a lot of work looking at that. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Metcalfe incident and know that these very large transformers are customized. They take a year or more to make, and leave us pretty vulnerable if there is a successful attack. Metcalf was not successful in actually damaging the transformers. It could have been, and so there's a big concern. We looked at that, as has the National Research Council. And then finally, aging and leak-prone natural gas distribution pipelines. Those raise environmental and safety concerns. We had a set of methane roundtables here at the department to discuss this issue. You got the support for doing something on this from the industry, the utilities who want to enhance safety, from the environmentalists who want to reduce methane emissions, and from the unions who want to lay a bunch of pipe. And so we saw a convergence of interests here, and have a significant recommendation in that regard. These are basis differentials for natural gas transmission infrastructure. What you see in 2007 is a huge spread in your basis differentials. Okay, so big price differences at your price points around the country, and then you see them all coming together down here in 2014 with a couple of exceptions. New England and the Northeast, which is infrastructure constrained, and I believe this little yellow uptick here, we looked at that, and that's an outlier. I think it was in Chicago in the Midwest. It was just an unusual blip and is not expected to continue. But the Northeast and New England is. That shows you issues with, and the cost of infrastructure constraints. The reason, and we think the reason is for the convergence of all of those, is that shale gas is pretty widely distributed, more widely distributed than gas production has been in the past. And it does raise an issue of how this might affect the economics of storage, which the investment in storage is associated with these wide differentials. And when you're seeing everything come together, it could affect the economics of that, and actually the economics of pipelines in general. So it's an issue we didn't go into deeply, but it's something we'd like to look at in the future. This is, I mentioned the leak-prone pipes. The figure on the left is Indianapolis. The figure on the right is Boston. And the yellow and gold dots there are methane leaks. And what happened, Indianapolis had a gas explosion. Its LDC had a gas explosion in the 1980s. So they launched in the 80s a pipeline replacement program. And you can see the difference. It's been effective. Boston, Massachusetts itself took proactive action. The legislature passed a pipeline replacement program, and so it knows it has leak-prone bare steel and cast iron pipes, but it actually is taking action. You can see, though, however, it is a problem. I thought when we started this analysis that it was going to be largely an northeastern city, old city problem, but when you look over here in the bottom right, the states with the most cast wrought iron pipes and bare steel are pretty distributed across the country, and so we focused a lot on this, and these are utilities that have replacement programs. This one's replacement program is 80 plus years. Some of them are 35, 40 years. And we have a recommendation in here designed to accelerate the replacement of those pipes. I mentioned the cybersecurity. This is electricity outages by type of event and lost customer hours. On the left, it's by type of event. The yellow is weather, the gray is a physical attack, green is cyber, and black or blue is component failures. The graph on the right is number of customer hours lost, and they are virtually all due to weather. And so our concerns about extreme weather are borne out by customer hours that are lost, and you don't see any customer hours that are lost to physical or cyber attacks. It's just something that we need to be defensive about and work on, and we are. These are most of the large ticket item recommendations are in this chapter. Because we're looking at TS&D infrastructure, resilience is a huge issue, and I can go through these very quickly. It's a 2.5. This is, generally speaking, these numbers are over 10 years. $2.5 to $3.5 billion over 10 years. A competitive financial assistance program to accelerate pipeline replacement. What we, for natural gas distribution systems, what we have done there is done a lot of analysis, and this is to buy down the incremental cost of this replacement to low-income individuals in order to overcome resistance to PUCs who don't want the rate shock associated with accelerated replacement. And so that's what that figure is by and large. There's some O&M funding at the city gate where you also are seeing methane leaks, but by and large, that's what it is for. And I think we picked 150% of the poverty level. It will be competed with states. DOE does not want to get into the business of identifying low-income people in states. The states already do that, and so as do the utilities. But it would be designed to accelerate replacement by 50%, whichever it is. We haven't gotten deeply into program design at this point, because that's not what this document is about. I think program design is going to be very important to ensure the success of that program. We have $350 to $500 million to support state energy assurance plans. The range and the dollar figures on that are whether you do those plans on a 2-year cycle or a 3-year cycle. Those are really focused on emergency response and reliability on a state-by-state basis, and we think it is important. We would like to get some rigor and some very formal criteria for each of these in order to get some things that both the states and the federal government could use out of these energy assurance plans, and like updated curtailment plans. I know that those have a tendency to get old, and they certainly did before 9/11 and after 9/11. When I was working at GTI, some of the curtailment plans hadn't been updated since 1978. And curtailment plans were very important when something like Hurricane Sandy happened, for example. So again, that's another program design issue, but I think that that's a piece of it. Emergency exercises in the states, et cetera, et cetera. This section has a recommendation for $3 to $3.5 billion for energy pre-disaster energy infrastructure hardening. It costs a lot less if you do pre-disaster hardening than if you end up doing post-disaster hardening. And that hardening, if it's post-disaster, there are a lot of impediments and disincentives in law to build anything other than what you had before. We would actually like to use this pre-disaster hardening program to modernize as well as harden infrastructure, and so that's what it's focused on. DHS, FEMA has a small pre-disaster hardening program. The analysis of the awards that they've made show a 4-to-1 rate of return on that program. We did initially talk about putting it at DHS, but those aren't energy. That's not focused on energy, and this will be focused specifically on energy infrastructure hardening. One example, it's not obviously we don't have the money yet, of the type of thing we'd like to see. DOE worked with New Jersey Transit Grid. We did a conceptual design study for a microgrid for New Jersey, and working with Sandia Labs. That New Jersey Transit was an evacuation route in Hurricane Sandy, and the system went down. The train system went down, and so we have we worked with them on conceptual design. They have since successfully received a $410 million award to build a very large microgrid that it will not only keep the trains running in that part of the world, but it also will provide energy to their hospitals and a couple other facilities nearby when there's no emergency. And then what we would like to do on that infrastructure hardening funds is use an acceptable energy assurance plan as criteria for eligibility for the infrastructure hardening funds, so that you're getting rigor in both programs, and we think that will be very helpful. So those are the big ticket item recommendations in there. Modernizing the electric grid. I mentioned that the rate of growth for electricity use is slowing. And it looks flat there for a while. Karen knows the numbers backwards and forwards, but it's at its lowest level in decades. Electricity demand. We do expect that investments in transmission and distribution upgrades and expansions to grow, but I believe not much more than they would under a business as usual scenario through 2030. We have seen an increased use in distributed energy resources, and that trend is upsetting some traditional utility business models that haven't changed in the last 100 years or so. And this chapter does look a lot at that. I've already mentioned extreme weather events. Lack of adequate information and tools is impeding resilience, and state renewable portfolios and efficiency standards could influence infrastructure needs. And there are 17 states in the country that either require or incentivize indigenous renewables, which will affect something like, or could affect something like long distance versus shorter distance transmission, for example, when you require indigenous renewables. And so we didn't look too much at that, but I do think it will have an impact on infrastructure, as will your distributed generation technologies. These are the drivers of circuit mile transmission additions. This is from a survey of everyone who is interested in doing this. And not surprisingly, reliability is the biggest slice of that pie, and renewables integration is the next. So I think that's an important indicator about how focused the industry is on integrating renewables into transmission. I'm going to skip through this one. Did we fix this figure, Karen? Yeah, it's got both sides of the trough on it now, right? Yeah. We had a huge build out of electric infrastructure after World War II, electricity circuit miles after, transmission circuit miles after World War II, and then you saw a big trough there. And now you're seeing that the investment go back up again and build out go back up again because I think, quite frankly, age is a problem and changes in the industry. This is these maps over here on the right are kind of a major focus and finding of the electricity chapter. the middle is what the system actually looks like. Okay, that's your actual transmission. The map on the top is NERC, it's your balancing authorities, and the map on the bottom is your RTOs and ISOs. And we did have two maps on here that are the modeling maps for NEMS, and I don't know what the other one, reads. And when you look at all of them, it suggests very strongly that electrons don't flow in the same way that the jurisdictions are structured. And so what we need to do is to, we don't recommend anything like federal preemption or anything like that at all. That's the system has grown up as the system has grown up, and we cannot perturb that beyond a point. But we do believe that DOE needs to use its convening power and its ability to establish and develop model frameworks for evaluation of key services and technologies, or we are not going to be able to maximize the value of the new technologies that we have, given these jurisdictional issues and their mismatch to how electrons flow, that we will not be able to maximize the value of those technologies if we don't do a lot more evaluation work and a lot more convening work to work with the states. And quite frankly, Canada as well, because our electricity markets are extremely integrated with the Canadians. There is a $3.5 billion recommendation in this chapter for grid modernization. That is the DOE crosscut. That money is already in our FY16 budget request. I forgot to mention the state energy assurance plans are also in our FY16 budget request. So these are not incremental funds to agency baselines. These are in our baseline. But that is a cross-cut across many offices in the department, including ours, to get a much more robust and integrated focus on grid modernization. Another big recommendation we have in here is $300 to $350 million for regional electricity grid reliability grants. And we have a lot of reliability issues for the system. I've gone through many of them already, and so those are would be grants to states or to regions. There is encouragement. We would put encouragement in this program design to encourage regional cooperation. And so that's another big recommendation in here. I don't want to focus only on the recommendations that cost money. I think that the valuation recommendations in this chapter are as important as anything, if not more so, because that's a huge activity that we think we need to undertake, as I said, to maximize the technologies that we have developed. This is our energy security chapter, modernizing U.S. energy security infrastructures and in a changing global environment. This is, one might think that this figure would be in the shared transport chapter, but I like using it here instead. This is 2010, the top map. Those little red dots are crude oil train loading facilities. Okay, that's 2010. This is 3 years later, 2013. It is an amazing change in infrastructure. The green dots here are barges. So you're not only moving crude oil by rail, you're moving it by barge. And so this says a lot more to me than a change in mode by which we are transporting crude oil. It shows the change in historic product flows, oil product flows in the United States. Historically, oil moved from the Gulf of Mexico north largely to Midwest refineries, and that has reversed here. And we are now moving a lot of oil from north to south and to points east and west as well. And so it is just an enormous change in our product flows. It also shows you how congested the Gulf of Mexico is. 52% of our refining capacity is in the Gulf of Mexico. You have a lot of oil going down there from the Bakken. You have oil going from the Eagle Ford and now increasingly from the Permian Basin. This is shale oil. That's going to, not all of it by any means, but a lot of that is going to the refineries and the distribution system in the Gulf of Mexico. And that congestion affects the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And the SPR is 40 years old. The authorizing legislation to establish the SPR and the conditions under which we can use it, I think it passed in 1975. In 1975, that we were not a participant in a global oil market in any way, shape, or form like we are now. The Texas Railroad Commission had a lot of influence over oil prices at that point in time, and now there is a global oil market, and so the threat to the U.S. economy is not necessarily a physical disruption of oil. It is much more an increase in global price. And because we are participants in a global oil market, and so we do have some recommendations, statutory recommendations in the QER to update the authorities of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, to modernize them, quite frankly, to reflect a truly global oil market. We also have recommendations for life extension and to increase the distribution capacity of the SPR. Right now, the design drawdown rate of the SPR is 4.4 million barrels a day. We could, in the event of an emergency, draw down 4.4, roughly that much oil, but we run the risk of backing out our own production because of the congestion in the Gulf of Mexico. And so that's not something that we are interested in doing. We would like to enhance the incremental distribution capacity of the SPR and have recommendations to do that. The way you do that is to get more oil onto the water, quite frankly. And the system, the distribution system on the water in the Gulf of Mexico and the storage systems in the Gulf of Mexico are congested with commercial crude oil. And so something else that we have found with our decline in oil imports is that it now the drawdown capacity of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is very affected by where the disruption occurs. We are importing into the Gulf of Mexico very little oil from the Middle East. We're importing a lot more oil from Venezuela and South America, and some, I think, from Nigeria. And so if you have a disruption in Venezuela, you create space in the Gulf of Mexico. So you can draw down more SPR oil. If you have a disruption in Saudi Arabia, we're importing very little Saudi Arabian oil into the Gulf of Mexico. You create no space. So that affects the drawdown capabilities of the SPR. These, as I mentioned, no one will be able to read this slide. We always have to have some illegible ones in there. It is on our website. This is a demonstration, a depiction, a cartoon of how product flows and pipelines have changed to reflect the new domestic oil production reality in the United States. I won't go into it, but it is an interesting map if you want to look at it in detail. One other thing about change in change in liquid fuels. This chapter is by and large about liquid fuels. A couple other things. 10% of our gasoline supply is now ethanol. That has a major impact on shared infrastructure, which I'll talk about next. But also we are exporting significant amounts of product and oil and natural gas liquid products, and that also is affecting pipeline flows and gas processing capacities and refining capacity in several regions of the country. So I don't know what the numbers are, Carmine, for product exports. I think about 2.5 million barrels a day right now, expected to go to 4 or 5 in the not too distant future, and that affects your net oil imports as well. Says something about the refinery needs in the U.S. These are recommendations in this chapter, updating the SPR. Release authorities, I already mentioned that, to reflect modern oil markets. It's not just acknowledging in law that the harm to the U.S. economy is created much more from oil prices than loss of supply. But also there is a limitation on the amount of oil that the president can put into oil markets in anticipation of an emergency. And I think that's 30 million barrels right now. The anticipatory authority is that, but that's what causes the harm to the U.S. economy. And that limitation, and you might very well know that it's coming, and that limitation might not be enough to minimize the harm to the U.S. economy. So we focused on that as well. We want to invest $1.5 to $2 billion in improving the distribution capacity of the SPR, as I mentioned, and do work on biofuels. Do R&D work on biofuels and look at domestic shipping once again. We did look at the shipbuilding capacity in the U.S. In the 1980s. They eliminated subsidies for shipbuilding in the United States under the theory that we were building enough ships for the Navy that would sustain the U.S. shipbuilding capacity. We're not building any ships for the Navy now, so we don't have capacity to build ships for the Navy now, and so it could be a national security concern from a different perspective, not necessarily energy. So there is a study in there for that. Where are we? This is improving shared transport, energy transport infrastructures, and this is, I mentioned crude oil transport by rail. 2009, these are quarterly numbers. 2009, it looks like about 7,000 rail car loads of oil. And over in 2014, over the course of a year, it's probably 500,000 rail cars of oil. So you're going from 7,000 to 500,000 in a very short period of time, a 5-year period of time or 6 years. And we all know about the rail accidents and rail safety. You have seen increases in barge. They're not as significant as rail, but similar increases in barge and truck shipments. And so, and it is energy that has perturbed these existing systems, because you can see down at the bottom, 70% of ethanol moves by rail. The Bakken oil is moving by rail. Agriculture moves by rail. Fertilizer moves by rail. And a lot of the inland waterways are in the upper Midwest. And so what you're seeing is an enormous regional congestion of these shared infrastructures in the upper Midwest. This is a Powder River Basin map. 34 states get coal from the Powder River Basin. This is another thing that's in the upper Midwest. 34 states are getting coal from the Powder River Basin for power generation. 8 states contain get more than 90% of their coal for power generation from the Powder River Basin. So this is another competing commodity for space on rail. And what we saw this last winter, we did have a severe winter, was 4 small utilities in Minnesota. Coal-fired utilities had to shut down. They had 4 days coal stockpile left because of competition with oil and agriculture all at the same time. And it is a reliability issue. And I'm not quite sure how to solve the problem. It's very difficult to say what's more important, oil or coal. But when I ask who has the authority to make the decision to move the commodity, it is the railroads. So the reliability of these utilities is to some degree in the hands of the railroads. This is, we did a lot of analysis of ports and waterways. This is this cartoon. The left it's the Lake Charles Ship Channel, and those are the authorized dimensions for that ship channel to allow 2 tankers to pass. I think it's 40 feet deep and 400 feet wide. This is an illustrative condition of what the ship channel looks like in different locations. There has been funding this year put into dredging this ship channel, but the Gulf Coast ship channels and ports tend to silt up more quickly, much more quickly than other ports. And we don't call it this in the QER, but the channel users that brought us this call it self-dredging. And there's a lot of oil moving through this ship channel, and some new LNG tanker exports are going to be moving through this ship channel as well. And so funding for port maintenance has a significant impact on energy and other commodities. Down here are various port channel systems. A couple of them are surprising, but we looked at both crude and petroleum products and coal exports that are moving through those systems, and some of them, those are very, very significant energy ports. And as you all, I'm sure, know, several ports are doing widening in anticipation of the widening of the Panama Canal. Those are not all energy ports, and ports are a tough business. And so those Panamax ports could be drawing investment and funding away from some of your energy ports that are not going to be Panamax ports. And so I think it's a policy issue that we need to pay a lot of attention to in the future. This is inland waterways. U.S. has the largest inland waterway system in the world, and we share a lot of that with Canada. There's a lot moving around the Great Lakes. These are hours of lock unavailability, this graph is, on U.S. inland waterways. The blue up here is unscheduled mechanical failures. Many of these locks on our inland waterway systems are pre-1960s, so they are approaching my age, which is really old, and they are having mechanical problems. We have focused on improving that in the Obama administration. You can see improvements here in the blue, and we have also, there is a user fee that pays for maintenance. And that user fee has been raised, but there is very little analysis suggests that we don't need to put a lot more money into this. And there, as I said, there's a lot of ethanol moving on this, a lot of coal, a lot of oil now moving on these inland waterway systems. These are the recommendations in this section. We did not, since they just raised the inland waterway user fee, we did do some analysis of port user fee. We never finalized it to the point of sending it out for recommendation, and it does have constitutional issues. It has to be on both imports and exports, and you have to isolate it to what is an energy import and export. So it's difficult to design. It could be done. We instead elected to focus on port connectors. And port connectors, so that's a $2 to $2.5 billion program there for port connectors. This is for the Department of Transportation. DOT has a Tiger program. I can't remember what Tiger stands for connectors, but it's not energy specific. This would be energy port specific and take care of some of the concerns I mentioned earlier about the energy ports, regardless of whether they're ports that are moving, are going to be moving the large Panamax container ships through them. These would focus on energy ports. So that's a new program there to address that. Something that doesn't cost a huge amount of money, but we think is very important, is doing analysis of this from a system. There are 5 or 6 different agencies who do this. We have had to rely on the Association of American Railroads for our information on railroads. EIA is getting better at it now since so much oil is being transported on railroads, but it is very problematic to get a clear handle on all of this and make good policy decisions, because the information is with the Coast Guard, it's with MARAD, it's DOT in general, it's the Corps of Engineers, and the expertise is at the Department of Energy, and our stakeholders are very affected by it, and it's different definitions, different time periods, et cetera, and so we want to improve that and do a one-time kind of energy systems analysis focused on shared infrastructures. And then finally, I think this is the last big one. We're running out of time here. The last, integrating North American energy markets. As I said, our electricity system is entirely integrated with Canada. That's why there's a North American Electricity Reliability Council. These are the product flows. The brown is obviously crude oil, gold is refined product, green is natural gas. I think we're increasing our natural gas exports to Canada, and about 10% of Canada's electricity generation comes to the United States. And I'm sure many of you know we have been working on authorizing transmission lines. We at DOE, that's one of our authorities. Gas exports is another one of our authorities. We have been approving LNG export permits at a fairly significant pace since Secretary Moniz has been here. And oil exports are commerce, and cross-border oil is state. It's confusing, I'm sure, for people on the outside. One other thing I'll say in the environmental section is a look at CO2 pipeline networks, and there is a significant effort underway to provide tax incentives for this. And we think it's an important part of an all-of-the-above energy strategy, and an important way to get an infrastructure up and running in order to find to lower the cost of capture and sequestration, both by assisting with the system and for enhanced oil recovery. So it's an important recommendation, and I think there's something in the FY16 budget on that, isn't there? No? Yeah, there is. So anyway, I'm going to skip through the rest of these and take some questions, because I think I don't know what. Do we have time? I don't know what what time I'm done here. So I know I have to go brief the House and the Senate. That will be, I'll have to give this presentation 3 times today, so. You think it was boring now, so. Any rate, love to take questions if people have them.
Thanks. Great presentation. I'm Tyson Slocum, Director of the Energy Program with Public Citizen. One of the challenges, obviously, with infrastructure is that it not only has to reflect today's needs, but try and project what needs are going to be over the 40 or so lifespan of that infrastructure. So on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve kind of proposed redesign, it was interesting that 2 weeks ago, Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil.
Just a second, I can't hear you.
Oh, sure.
It's not that I don't like your question.
All right. This is in regards to the SPR kind of redesign in light of current supply and demand flows in the lower 48. So Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil, 2 weeks ago gave an interview to the Associated Press where he said that onshore oil fracking is going to peak in about 10 years because the production declines after 1 year is between 40 and 70%. How does the fact that Exxon is out there saying onshore fracking in the Bakken and in the Eagle Ford are going to be in decline in a decade, how does that impact what the DOE is thinking about the infrastructure needs for the movement of oil, since that's going to change those dynamics in about a decade?
Well, the distribution capacity of the SPR, since we're part of a global oil market, I don't think that would have a huge, it would reduce the congestion of the SPR, but it doesn't diminish the need to have an insurance policy for oil disruption and global oil disruptions. And a global oil disruption would still have a similar impact on our economy. If you see a huge price spike, it still impacts the economy. I'm always skeptical of people talking about declines in production right now. I don't think that EIA sees a significant decline in production for a while. Carmine, I don't know.
I think if you take Rex Tillerson's statement at face value, thank you. If you take Rex Tillerson's statement at face value, it still means that for 20 years the situation is as bad or worse than it is now. In other words, it's going to get worse as we move forward in time, and then it won't even come back to where we are now for 20 years. So even if you take his forecast as given, that doesn't change our conclusions one bit. The situation will get worse, and for 20 years, and obviously we need the protection of the SPR for the next 20 years.
I'm just skeptical too, because it wasn't Rex Tillerson, but Lee Raymond in 2005 said that North America was running out of natural gas. And so I think it's, new technologies have had a way of increasing our domestic energy supplies. And but regardless, we are going to need a well-functioning Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And again, it's quite old, and it's 40 years old, and so we certainly need life extension. And as Carmine said, for 20 years, we're still going to need that takeaway capacity.
Thanks. I'm Dave Nemso, and I want to ask you this, Melanie, and you and the Secretary talked about it both explicitly and implicitly, and that is the overlapping, if not blurred, jurisdictional relationship between the feds and the states on all of the above: energy, infrastructure, gas. So this is a familiar issue that's been discussed often in this room.
Sure.
And so when I look at what you did, and I haven't read it yet, but the sense I get, and I just want to ask you to sort of react to how we deal with all these issues of gas pipelines and infrastructure and electricity grid on the state, federal. What I see is, appears to me to be a mix of technical assistance, moral support, direct financial assistance. So I want to ask if I got that right. And two, is that only useful for the states that want to do something in one of these arenas, or can it also get the states going who don't even think infrastructure or these energy issues are even a problem yet? So can you tackle any of those, of how you help those states move forward?
I haven't talked to any states that don't think that infrastructure is not an issue. I don't know about moral support. I wouldn't characterize it as such, but I would add a category which is additional analysis, which I think is extremely needed in this very rapidly changed energy space. It's just very different than it was when I was at the department 15 years ago. And that is reflected across the board in our infrastructures, in our electricity system, and customer choices, et cetera, et cetera. And so moral support is, I might supplant that with significant analysis and technical assistance, which I don't undervalue. We get asked for it a lot. And we have a lot to offer in that regard. And then there is direct financial assistance. We did not get into regulation. We're not a regulatory agency. And so by and large, we're not a regulatory agency. And where we do have standard setting authority, it's in end use. It's not in TS&D. It's efficiency standards fundamentally. So I think you might see a different flavor to a QER that was focused on supply and in use than what you're looking at here. But we just need to incentivize investment in these infrastructures. We have no misapprehension or misconception that these, although these are large dollar amounts, they are dwarfed by the private investment that is needed to do this. But we hope that these investments, and trust that these investments, are signaling some directional concern and interest. But most of this is going to have to come from the private sector. But these are the kinds of things that we can do with TS&D infrastructure, which is, with some exceptions, in the hands of the private sector. The public sector infrastructures that I talked about, the dredging of the ports and waterways and the inland waterways, that is a federal responsibility. We have our own federal responsibilities for transmission through our power marketing administrations and the SPR. Those are federal authorities. Those are impacted by budget caps. That's why we're looking for creative ways to fund these things, because the pure publics are under budget caps. They are more problematic, I think, than getting private investment if we can send some signals as to what direction we think we should be going. So that's what it is for TS&D infrastructure. You might see very different recommendations if and when we do supply and end use.
Great, thank you, and thanks. This is Sue Gander from National Governors Association. Thanks, Melanie and Karen, for all the hard work. Really impressive report and information, and want to congratulate you on that, and also the outreach that you did along the way. I know we benefited from having a lot of briefings. This is helpful as well, and I think we're trying to line somebody up for another briefing this week, so you'll be able to give the speech many, many times, I'm sure.
I'll try and freshen it up a little.
It'll get better every time. There's a lot to cover in this. I just wanted to drill down a little bit on the issue of energy assurance. That is indeed, along with really all of these issues, key importance to governors. We're actually going to be bringing teams from about five or six states together next month in New Jersey to look at issues of energy assurance, including the work that's being done on the New Jersey Transit and the microgrid. And so one key aspect of energy assurance is the question around energy storage. So I'm just wondering if on that particular, micro point, you could just share a little bit more about, what you found out about the state of energy storage, and kind of what recommendations or proposals you had around advancing that technology. Thank you.
Sure. We looked at energy storage sort of across the sectors, and I can talk a little bit about electricity, which then kind of bleeds right into natural gas. DOE did a couple studies through our labs for a couple of the states on storage deployment. What we found was, we did some scenario modeling where we looked at what a transmission system would look like under a whole variety of different stress conditions, and one was extremely low-cost storage. And it turns out that the models that we were using couldn't capture we didn't see a significant massive deployment of storage in the model results over the course of the time frame of our study. And part of that was probably because the models that we were using did not look at storage in the time frame that you would actually find storage useful in operating the grid. And so, building on the studies that DOE did for just a couple states, we're recommending sort of a broader national look at storage deployment and the use of storage in allowing for greater flexibility in grid operation. And we also looked at storage, and Melanie alluded to this when she was talking about the price differentials. We started looking at storage in the natural gas system and the gas-electricity interdependence. And there is adequate natural gas storage today for high deliverability storage. But we started to raise a question about what would happen if we saw a significant switch in natural gas in generating electricity, whether we would have different needs, and whether this decreasing price differential sort of across the country, as well as a potential decrease in price differential from seasonality, would affect the growing future investments in storage. And we did not have a great answer to that, and so that's one of the things that we'd like to look at, is what the changing dynamics of natural gas economics will have on storage.
I now forgot something I remember something I forgot to say too. Important to the Governors Association, and a big piece of work we did sort of related to storage is regional fuel resiliency studies. And as you know, we have two product reserves, a gasoline reserve and a diesel reserve in the Northeast. One that was established when I was here before, and one that was established when I was here now. And we have seen, certainly in Hurricane Sandy, you saw significant problems with the availability and distribution of fuels. One thing about that, because those both operate under different authorities, and we assume that we have a 2 million barrel reserve of diesel and gasoline that you could use up there, but the authorities to use the diesel are much more strict than the authorities for the gasoline. Gasoline is under the SPR authorities, and some people, when I was here before, who wanted us to never use the diesel reserve, put some pretty tough criteria in there for its use. One of our recommendations is to put them under the same authorities. But we looked at other regions of the country by PAD and sub-PAD for vulnerabilities similar to what we saw in the Northeast. Obviously, the Gulf Coast is very vulnerable, and because it has 52% of our refining capacity, its vulnerability increases the vulnerability of the rest of the country, particularly the Southeast. That's very reliant on just a couple of pipelines to move product to the Southeast. So the Southeast is is vulnerable. and we are doing a revised cost-benefit analysis for the Southeast. We're also looking at the Western United States. Carmine's team has been working on that. It's obviously physically isolated from distribution, transmission and distribution infrastructures, and Hawaii's very isolated. So those are obvious. Another thing we found in our preliminary work on regional fuel resiliency studies was some vulnerability in like the northern Rocky Mountain states, that those cities tend to be served by a single pipeline. And some of them are in earthquake-prone areas, which is a real problem for pipelines. So that was another area that we saw as vulnerable. You all are familiar with what happened with propane about a little over a year ago. That I think we spent a lot of time managing that crisis. It was not unlike the heating oil crisis when I was here before, where the head of EIA came to me and said that in 3 or 4 days we're going to be out of heating oil in the Northeast. It was very problematic with propane as well. My second tour of duty, and people die when you don't have a product like that in the winter. So,
if I could say one more thing, Sue, and it follows on Dave's question. We were very much guided by the Secretary's kind of characterization of the regionality of the energy landscape in this country, and that there really isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to some of the challenges that the industry, that states are grappling with. And so you'll see kind of a theme throughout the chapters of us looking at ways to provide new tools and new resources to the states to address some of these challenges, because so much of the work is being done outside the federal government. And we'll have a fact sheet very shortly that actually lists out across all the chapters the resources that are and tools that we would direct through the recommendations to the states.
Most of these recommendations are state-oriented, and the states have huge roles in this, that's who we want to work with on many of these things moving forward, and should. So.
Hi, Dave Terry, National Association of State
Dave.
Energy Officials.
Oh.
Obviously, this is hugely appreciated. The value, I think, of the analytical work that's been done is enormous. It's going to be for state planning, energy assurance, and otherwise, and we look forward to working with you to elevate this with not only the governors, but the House and Senate in particular, and means to fund some of the recommendations. I think in particular the visibility you've given to liquid fuels issues and our concerns about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve modernization are appreciated. One place I think that I guess I have some questions, I would say around energy assurance planning. I think the criteria and targets that you've mentioned are an excellent approach, and we strongly support that. In the area of grid modernization, 38 of the state energy offices lead statewide energy planning, and one of the things they grapple with is this holistic need to address not only all the changes in distributed generation and efficiency, but the integration of renewables, and add to that ultra-efficient facilities that are popping up in the industrial sector, zero net energy buildings, consumer behavior-driven efficiency, et cetera. And I think one of the areas we could probably use help is modeling and analysis on a state-by-state basis and multi-state basis, not necessarily regional. Is that something you contemplate, not so much as a grant program, but as a literally modeling and analysis work of all the expertise you have at the department?
I think that's music to the ears of a whole bunch of people sitting here on the front row. I mean, yes, I think that we need more of that, particularly in the electricity arena and reliability arena. And I am struck by the integrated nature and need for all of that. We tend to look at these in a very siloed way, an infrastructure focused way. And I think that we need to do significant work in that regard. And we've had enormous cooperation and support from the national labs. They have some very, very good work, and I think that's something we'd love to talk to you about soon.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, Dan Delury with the Association for Demand Response and Smart Grid. I think most people judge the Smart Grid Investment Grants program to have been a resounding success, and that's over for the time being, hopefully. But I guess in the context of the QER, and also those were 50% matching grants, so it did leverage private investment. But was consideration given to deployment assistance in addition to RD&D?
Go ahead, Karen.
Yes, the grid modernization crosscut has a whole suite of potential investments from RD&D through institutional support through deployment.
See, I have to say that again, I keep going back to when I was at the department before. The research has moved so much further down the research chain, and that successful deployment strategies are increasingly important. And just because there is enormous power of the incumbents and in the system, and so it requires a lot of policy thinking in order to figure out how to best achieve that.
And I would say also that some of the recommendations are designed to break down some of the institutional and regulatory business model challenges to the deployment. So whether it's the valuation recommendation or whether it's accelerating interconnectivity and interoperability work, that those are all designed to kind of help get those new technologies online. All right. Thank you.